Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining EV Cincy for today's E-Vroom Zoom. I'm so very glad to welcome today's guest, Marie McConnell of Clean Fuels, Ohio. Marie, where are you? There you are. And Gary Heaton, Drive Electric Cincinnati. Hey, Gary, with the awesome background there. That's pretty sweet. Um, they'll tell you a lot more about themselves in a bit. If this is your first time joining our E-Vroom Zooms, we host these monthly conversations as an opportunity to connect with the public on EV topics and with the movers and shakers in the EV space, primarily in Cincinnati and across Southwest Ohio, but we are more than happy to expand the circle. I'm really excited about this series because it does give us this chance to have conversations, generate some dialogue and ask questions and learn from one another on this topic, especially as we are still kind of operating in our COVID-19 haze. My name is Carla Walker, and I'm the climate advisor for the city of Cincinnati. I support the city's Office of Environment and Sustainability on a number of their climate change initiatives, including their electrification strategy, which EV Cincy is a part of. I want to take a quick minute to have the rest of the EV Cincy crew introduce themselves. I'm going to turn it over to Liz. Liz, where are you? Great.
Hi there, Carla. Hi, everyone. I'm Liz. This is my second week with EV Cincy. I am the Environmental Defense Fund Fellow with the City of Cincinnati for this summer. Currently a grad student at Columbia studying climate, energy, and electric vehicles, of course. I just wanted to say hi. I'm delighted to be working with all of you and our ambassadors this summer. I can feel like there's a great energy with this group, and I'm excited to plug into it.
I love that. I'm going to give a big, giant, special shout out to my girl, Sarah Fisher. Sarah, raise your hand. Today is Sarah's last day with us. So forgive me, I might actually tear up because she is just amazing. And she has been with us from the very start of all of this. Tremendous help in getting these E-Vroom Zooms off the ground, in addition to just like everything else. She's not going to go too far, though. She's going to be hanging out with our one of our partners, Electrification Coalition. So thank you, Sarah, very much. For everyone who, again, may be the first time you're joining us, EV Cincy is the city's public outreach and education initiative to build awareness around the benefits of electric vehicles and the EV activities happening in and around Cincinnati. These events are part of how we kind of reworked our public outreach and engagement effort under COVID-19. A couple things about our chats. We've got a few poll questions we're going to be throwing out there to you. If we can get the first one out here. This is just a test to see if you guys can do this real quickly. We'd love your participation and feedback. We'll drop this one and then get you used to a couple of things, and then you'll see a couple more come through the Zoom Vroom Zoom when we kind of move forward. The other thing I want to let you guys know is these are not webinars, right? We didn't want to do a webinar. While there may be a PowerPoint deck for some of these chats, like today, we want to make sure that we are engaging you as an audience. So we ask, if you can, to just make sure your camera is switched on. I also want to encourage you all to, you're going to hear a lot of information from these two. So I want to encourage you to drop your questions and comments into the chat box during the presentation. Okay. So the way that we'll do this is once Gary and Marie finish their presentation, I'll start off the conversation with a couple of just quick interview questions just to get everyone chatting, and then we'll open up the Q&A and I'll call on a couple of you to potentially ask your questions. While we're pushing hard for this to be engaging, and lively, we also want to make sure that you can hear. So once we welcome the guests and they get on board, please be kind and mute your microphones, and we'll get started. So join me in welcoming Marie and Gary.
Thanks, Carla. Saw another poll question pop up, so we'll give people a couple seconds to plug in their answers to that. But just a quick introduction. My name is Marie McConnell. I am the Outreach Manager for Clean Fuels Ohio. CFO is a nonprofit. We're actually based out of Columbus, but we work statewide to advocate for and implement sustainable and alternative fuel technologies. So as an organization, we're actually fuel and technology neutral. So our work really kind of runs the gamut, anything from natural gas to propane to electric. I actually work specifically exclusively on electric with our Drive Electric Ohio initiative, and that is kind of the holistic approach to electrification that houses all of our EV work. So we are doing everything from dealer and manufacturer education to working with policymakers and decision makers to consumer education. We're really able to be really far-reaching and impactful because we have a network of chapters and volunteers across the state. We're actually really lucky to have Drive Electric Cincinnati, one of our chapters, joining us today. Gary Heaton, who is the president of that. They're really our boots on the ground. So they are kind of doing all of the work out in the community. They're the ones giving EV test drives, hosting education events, calling legislators, kind of all of the above to get folks behind the wheel, to get more cars on the road. So with that, I will pass it over to Gary to sort of run through everything. Gary, you're going to share your screen, right?
I will indeed. And
Awesome.
So thanks for that introduction, Marie. I've been interested in sustainable transportation since 2004 when I got a Prius, and I've been an EV owner for 3 years. And I really believe that one of the barriers to getting folks to drive electric is education. It's just way too hard to kind of learn what's special about EVs and whether they're really right for you. So I'm really happy to be able to bring you this topic today. So I'm going to go ahead and start screen sharing. So Marie, do you see the slide?
I do. So we're today going to cover kind of 3 big areas in terms of shopping for an EV. So the first of which is going to be 3 important questions that anyone who's kind of EV curious should answer before they head to a dealership. And then we're going to kind of run through the available models in our region. And then finally go over some important resources for charging and purchasing and some cost saving resources that are out there.
Okay. So if you're hopefully as part of joining us here, you're interested in potentially buying an EV sometime in the future. In many ways, buying an EV is really similar to buying a gas car. For example, if you're looking for an SUV body style, you're going to look for an EV with an SUV body style. But buying an EV is different in a few ways. You'll need to answer 3 questions. First, where are you going to charge it? You can see in the picture here that it's the Chevy Bolt's being charged in the garage. And there are other options for charging as well we'll get into. Second question is, how much can I afford to spend? There are some factors for how much it costs for both buying and operating an EV, with EVs costing less to run. We'll get into that. And then third, how much range do I need? Which is probably the question, along with charging, that is hardest for people to kind of wrap their heads around. So we'll talk about that and how that impacts what EV you choose. So starting with charging, where am I going to charge it? So most people charge at home, over 80%, and that's the cheapest and most convenient place to charge if you can. If you live in multifamily housing, I suggest you ask your landlord or property manager about installing an outlet where you park if there isn't one. EVs can charge slowly from a regular 3-prong outlet, or you can run a dedicated circuit for faster charging. And there'll be more info in Marie's final slides about charging resources to give you more information about that. If you do need to charge away from home, as you might expect, there's an app for that. In fact, there's more than one app for that. If you get, for example, a Chevy car or a Tesla, the app will actually help you find chargers. But also there's one called PlugShare that's one of the most complete list of charging locations. You can see on the right-hand side there a map of the Cincinnati area with the EV charger locations on it, and each of those locations may have multiple plugs. The good news is, in terms of charging away from home, that the number of chargers that is available is growing constantly. City of Cincinnati alone is planning to add over 60 charging ports this year. And there's also a startup company called Electrata that's announced that it's going to be adding 50 charging sites and over 250 ports in the next year in the Cincinnati-Dayton area. Second question, how much can I afford to spend? So the easiest approach for most people is to make the cost comparison apples to apples with a gas car. So here's how you do that. And I illustrate it with an example from the Ford website. So EVs typically have a higher upfront cost, and that can be reduced by up to a $7,500 federal tax credit. EVs also have lower fuel and maintenance costs. As an example, if you look at Ford's guidance, they point out that the 5-year cost for owning a Mustang Mach-E is about the same as buying a gas engine Ford Escape. And you may be wondering if these savings are theoretical or whether you'll actually see them in real life. So I can actually give you my own personal experience on this. I bought an EV, and when I did, I actually did get the full $7,500 tax credit. I calculated my fuel savings. It was about $900 a year, and you can see in the slide here that Ford's illustration shows about a $900 fuel savings. And
Uh-oh, Gary, I don't think we can hear you.
Yeah, we lost your audio, Gary.
hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Now we go. There you go.
All right, so so I switched microphones, so I'll be a bit boomier, but hopefully we'll be able to keep going. So, so I was talking about in the Ford example, they kind of illustrate potential savings, and so are those savings real? And I was just sharing my actual personal experience. So I bought an EV, and I did get the $7,500 federal tax credit, and I also calculated my fuel savings. In the Ford example, they show about a $900 potential annual fuel savings. That's what I calculated that I got as well. And then third is the maintenance. So the maintenance is cheaper for EVs. You don't have oil changes. In my 3-year ownership for a Chevy Bolt, the only maintenance I had was rotating the tires. Okay. So there'll be more information on how you can kind of calculate the costs for an EV, and some links for calculating your own fuel savings and the tax credit in Marie's section at the end. All right, third question, how much range do I need? So this really depends on how you plan to use the car. If you're in a 2-car household, you can use the EV as the daily driver. take the gas car on road trips. And so the daily driver usage is kind of the core one. So you just need enough range to cover your round trip commute distance plus, any errands that you might typically run. If you do need to do trips, for example, round trip to grandma's house, then you'd want to take a look at how many miles it is for that. If you want to do long distance trips in your EV, then I suggest you look at longer range EVs with at least 200 miles range so that you can drive at least a couple hours on the highway before you stop for another stop for a charge. So how do you calculate the range you need? So take the travel distance that you need to go. And then just like in a gas car, where you would never run the gas car down to zero gas, in an EV, you don't run the battery down to zero battery. So you want to have some reserve range. And then the other factor is to adjust for the fact that you get less range in the winter. All cars, including gas cars, get less range in the winter. In EVs, because they need to heat the cabin with power from the batteries, tend to have a bit less range in the winter. So you want to take that into account when you figure how much range you need. So an example, if you have a daily driver need of 30 miles and you want to have at least 30 miles reserve, that's 60 miles total. And then you divide by 80%. Why 80%? Cincinnati has fairly mild winters, so it's pretty typical to get about 80% of your summer range in the winter. And so that would mean that you'd have a EV range that you'd be looking for of at least 75 miles. Okay, so now that you know what range you need based on how you plan to use your EV, let's look at the two types of EVs available today. That's battery electric vehicles, or BEVs, and plug-in hybrids, or PHEVs. If you look on the right-hand side of the slide here, you can see a diagram of the battery electric vehicle. They're really a marvel of simplicity. They just have a great big battery and an electric motor. They don't even have a multi-speed transmission. Almost all EVs have only a single gear. Now, if you look at plug-in hybrids, they have a smaller battery and they add a gas tank and a gas engine outlined here in yellow. So just as an aside, I don't actually have a conventional hybrid on the slide. If the car doesn't have a plug, it's not considered an EV. Conventional hybrids are really more efficient gas cars because they get all their energy from gasoline. So if we're talking about EVs, it's got a plug. All right, so let's take a look then at range for the BEV and PHEV options. New EVs have an all-electric range of 110 to almost 400 miles. So you can see that if you're talking about the daily driver, all new EVs have enough range to meet the daily driver need unless you have an extraordinarily long commute. That doesn't mean that folks don't worry about running out of battery. It's got a name even, it's called range anxiety. You may have heard of it. And one way to think about this is to compare it to who's thinking about buying an EV is thinking about somebody who's never flown before and has a fear of flying. You could tell them all day long that flying is the safest way to travel, but it won't eliminate their anxiety. And once they, kind of take the plunge and you've driven an EV for a while, you'll tend to not have range anxiety, but it can be a factor for people. So that's where the plug-in hybrids can be helpful. You don't have range anxiety because as soon as the fairly small battery is used up, the car seamlessly switches over to use a gas engine. And so you'll have, over 300 miles range. And if you run low, you can just fill it up with gas and keep going. But because it has a small battery, the all electric range is fairly limited. So for the PHEVs available now, the available range is from only 10 miles to 53 miles, all electric. So the key thing to think about is whether, if you're thinking about getting a plug-in hybrid, whether it actually has enough electric range to meet your daily driver need. I have actually a personal story to share about this. My brother bought a 2012 Prius plug-in and it had 11 miles of all electric range. And he was really excited about it, but actually he ended up being disappointed because he could not actually, whenever he drove it, he found that it was pretty much always using the gas engine. And data shows that if you have a really short range, all electric range for a plug-in hybrid, people tend not even to bother to plug it in because you're really driving so much on gasoline. So please, please, if you're looking at a plug-in hybrid, look at one that's got enough that you really can drive all electric for your daily driver need. So in chatting with people about plug-in hybrid, and as soon as I was talking to somebody who had range anxiety, and as soon as she heard that, hey, there's no range anxiety with a plug-in hybrid, she said, wow, plug-in hybrid is the best of both worlds. And not quite, because there are some trade-offs. I'll just mention them briefly. If you have a plug-in hybrid, you're probably going to be plugging in every night. If you have a battery electric, you might plug it in once or twice a week. You need space for the battery and for the gas engine and the gas tank. All that takes interior space. So interior space for the same size vehicle is going to be roomier with a battery electric than with a plug-in hybrid. And then, of course, you do still have gas engine complexity and maintenance with a plug-in hybrid. Let's see here. Oops, sorry. All right. So let's review what EV choices there are in Ohio. And we'll do it by body style, starting with sedans. And then for each of the sedans that are available, I list first the manufacturer suggested retail price. That's actually the price that you'd see on the manufacturer's website. That means it excludes the destination charge. So the real cost of these will all be about $1,000 more because of that. Second, for range, you'll see that for some of them, there's two numbers. Like if you look at the Nissan Leaf, there's range 150 to 226 EV miles. The reason for the two numbers is that the manufacturer makes available a standard battery pack and then a long range one. So the 226 for the Leaf is the long range battery pack, and similarly for the Model 3, the 322 EV miles is the long range battery pack option. Third is the 0 to 60 time. This is just come right off the manufacturer's website, or if they didn't publish it, from Car and Driver's test drive evaluation of cars. And then last is the tax credit. So different cars have different amounts of federal tax credit available. Maria will give you a link where you can look it up yourself, but for convenience, I just noted the federal tax credit available on each vehicle. All right, so with that background out of the way, let's talk about the sedans available. So there are two new kids on the block: the Mini electric two-door, which is the cheapest BEV you can buy. And then also the Porsche Taycan is new, and it's the most expensive one you can buy, with configurations up north of $180,000. The availability of the Mini with 110 EV miles at a low price point really illustrates the importance that I talked about of really understanding the range that you need. The new Mini could be really an awesome daily driver for someone, particularly if you have another gas car available in the household to do longer trips. And it also kind of is an interesting case because the Mini is available in a gas car version and an all-electric version. And actually, if you look at the cost of the Mini electric, if you're eligible for that $7,500 tax credit, the Mini electric is actually $1,000 cheaper than the gas version. And that's not even counting fuel and maintenance savings. Plus, the EV version accelerates and handles better. So it's really a winner there for showing EVs versus gas cars side by side for a comparable car. Moving on next to crossovers and SUVs under 50,000, we have two new entries coming out just this year. They're not actually available on lots yet, but they're announced for availability this year. That's the Ford Escape plug-in hybrid and the Toyota RAV4 Prime plug-in hybrid. If you want to buy one, stay tuned for the tax credit amount. Use the link that Maria will provide later to look that up. If you're interested in the Chevy Bolt, note that it doesn't have a tax credit anymore, but GM is offering what appears to be an ongoing $8,500 manufacturer's discount on it, which more than makes up for the tax credit. The only thing I would note about the Volt, if you're interested in the Volt, it's a popular choice, is that DC fast charging isn't included in the base model. That's a $750 option that I strongly consider that you get if you're planning to buy a Volt. And then the last one on this page that's really worth noting is the Ford Mustang Mach-E. I'm really happy that Ford is taking their 50-year-old iconic Mustang brand and making it fully electric. That one should be available starting in roughly November if Ford's timeline stays on track. Moving on to EV choices over 50,000 for crossover SUVs. I won't actually spend much time talking about these. They're definitely higher price points. I would note that you get amazing performance for these vehicles. If you look at, for example, the Tesla Model X, big vehicle, but it's got a 0 to 60 time of 2.6 seconds. Even the Model Y is in the 3s. So you move up to the higher price points, you get even more EV performance. The less expensive models are still better acceleration than your typical gas version of the same car. Next is pickup trucks. And if I showed on the slide all the electric pickup trucks available now in Ohio, it would be a blank slide. There are no electric pickup trucks you can buy now, but there are a whole bunch on the way, starting with a Ford F-150. Ford's the market leader in pickups. They put out a teaser video that you may have seen with the Ford F-150 EV prototype pulling over a 1 million pound load of rail cars. So that generated some excitement for it. It's expected in mid-2022, roughly for when that would be available. Rivian is a startup company. It plans to sell delivery vans to Amazon in addition to selling kind of an adventure pickup and also an SUV. They have a factory in nearby Indiana, so I'm hopeful that when these become available in 2021, that you'll be able to buy one in Ohio. Third is the Tesla Cybertruck, which got huge press when it was introduced. Most reviewers saying they hated its looks, but then some of them reconsidered and said, maybe it's not so bad. It's certainly different. Regardless, it has the lowest EV truck starting price of any that have been so far been announced. The GMC Hummer should have an introduction announcement coming perhaps in just a few weeks. But their teaser says that it's going to have massive power with over 1,000 horsepower. And then last is the Lordstown Endurance, which will be made right here in Ohio near Youngstown. It's notable because it's the first EV I know of to have a 4 electric motor designed with the motor inside each of the wheels. So it'll be interesting to read reviews and see about the pros and cons of that design. Lastly, there's not been announced from Dodge Chrysler, other than they say they've got a Jeep, electrified Jeep coming soon. And that's expected to be a plug-in hybrid model. So this lists some EVs that you might hear about that aren't generally available in Ohio. Not all EVs are available in every state. In fact, many EVs are available only in the dozen zero emission states that follow California emission standards. I include this slide because in particular, the Kia and Hyundai EVs tend to do well in reviews. So if you go online and research EVs, you'll probably see reference to the Kia Niro, Hyundai Kona EVs as being, a lot of value for the money, good range, good features. But the issue is they're not sold in Ohio, and also if you are tempted to buy one out of state and drive it back here, is servicing if you have issues with it. Local dealers that we contacted either won't service them or would do only a limited non-drivetrain servicing. So if you're considering any of these cars, just make sure that you check on the servicing before you buy And then last, in terms of EVs available, is you probably noticed that the price points are pretty high for all the new EVs. And so what about used ones? So you can get plug-in hybrid and full EVs under 20,000. And because so many EV models are new, you won't find many of them available used, but you will find that among plug-in hybrids, you'll find plenty of Chevy Volts. Among battery electrics, Chevy Bolts are kind of probably your best bet because they'll have the longest range, but also if you can handle kind of daily driver with less than 100-mile range, you can look at the Nissan Leafs and BMW i3s. In this particular screenshot, I show a screenshot from myev.com. There many of the used car sites you can find EVs on. myev.com happens to be one that's dedicated to EVs. And there's also Drive Electric Dayton did a seminar that actually specifically talked about how to buy a used EV. And so if you send me a message and use the contact link, I can send you a link to that presentation if you're interested in buying a used EV. So, Marie.
Wonderful. Thanks, Gary. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about was fuel cost calculators. So like Gary mentioned, one of the biggest cost savings associated with driving electric is refueling savings. So the Alternative Fuels Data Center has a really great tool. You can actually plug in your specific make and model, which I actually did. Gary, if you click forward. So I admittedly do not drive electric yet. I have an old hand-me-down I'm trying to squeeze the last couple years, couple miles out of. So I actually plugged in the car I drive compared to what it would be like to drive all electric. And I'm sorry, a lawnmower just started right as I started talking. So sorry about the background noise. And if you're, so you can see the cost savings. If you're not sure exactly what your vehicle's fuel efficiency is, or if you're interested in learning more about the MPG equivalent of driving electric, Gary, the link, if you click one more time, fueleconomy.gov has the EPA fuel efficiency ratings for, I think, every vehicle through 2020 at this point. So highly recommend checking those out. I just use the national averages for driving here, but you can get really, really specific into, you know, what's your daily commute, what does your out-of-town travel look like, how much time do you spend on the highway versus in town, to really dig into exactly what your cost savings could look like. So I mean, in this case, Gary, if you click one more, I mean, you can see that the potential here for me with a little bit of an older car is literally a third of the cost. So highly recommend checking that out. Click forward one more. Cool. So like we said, cost, refueling savings, maintenance savings, those are you know, a cost or a lack thereof that accumulate over time, right? So the biggest barrier for a lot of folks right now is that the upfront cost of EVs is still a little bit pricier. In the next couple years, we very much expect that price to match, if not drop below, that of an internal combustion vehicle, so reaching that point of cost parity, we call it. But in the meantime, the biggest way to sort of bridge that gap is with the federal income tax credit. So for plug-in vehicles, for new BEVs or PHEVs, that tax credit is up to $7,500. And as Sarah mentioned in the chat, that is going to be really determined based on the size of your battery, as well as how many vehicles the manufacturer has sold to that point. So folks are probably familiar with the fact that Tesla and Chevy, their tax credit is no longer available. They've sold too many vehicles to still be eligible. And you can see here in the screenshot from the website what that sort of phase out program looks like. So for everybody else, Nissan, Toyota, Kia, everyone basically that's not Tesla or Chevy, that tax credit is still available, and they're not expected to really hit that 200 cap or 200,000 cap in the near future. So they are still eligible for the full tax credit, and even after they hit that cap, they're eligible for half the tax credit for 6 months, and then a quarter of the tax credit for 6 months after that. So Gary, if you click once more, you can find exactly what the vehicle you're interested in is eligible for, as well as, you know, what that kind of scheduled step-down credit program or credit availability looks like. At fueleconomy.gov, I threw that link in there, and then also included a link to the specific tax credit form that you would fill out to claim that. So no matter what time of year you bought your vehicle, you would wait until you filed your taxes that following spring to claim that tax credit. So we can move on to the next slide. Great. And similarly to a tax credit for the vehicle's upfront cost, there's also a tax credit available for charging. So specifically for installing level 2 charging in your home, it's for 30% of the cost of the charger and installation up to $1,000. So that includes not only the hardware, like the charging box, but also any wiring that you would need to do, running any conduit, installing the correct outlet, and those installation costs associated with that. So I included a link to ChargePoint's website, and they have a really great step-by-step checklist on how to find a charger, claim the tax credit, as well as throw in that form in there for you in a PDF. Just wanted to point out that it doesn't have to be ChargePoint to claim the tax credit. It doesn't have to be a smart charger. It can be if you're interested. It can also just be a non-network charger is eligible as well. But that link is there to walk you through that process. And I would be remiss not to plug share one more time as well. If you haven't gone on there to see what public charging looks like in your area, a lot of times they're right under our noses. I have given a lot of EV test drives, and I will say without a doubt, the thing that convinces people that they can drive electric is taking a look at that app and seeing what the charging map actually looks like. So lastly, and arguably the most important resource for an EV driver is their local Drive Electric chapter. So obviously here in Southwest Ohio, that would be Drive Electric Cincinnati, but we do have chapters across the state. And so not only are these, you know, the people who are kind of helping folks get started driving electric, but they are, you know, an invaluable resource once you've made that purchase. So anything from, you know, who is a good electrician to help me install this charger, or, you know, who's a good mechanic that has worked on EVs, just to what are like some good tips and tricks to getting the most out of my battery in the winter. I mean, these folks in this chapter have collectively how many years of electric driving experience and so much knowledge. So if you are not already a part of that Facebook group, definitely would recommend getting in there, as well as just reaching out to Gary or myself if you wanted to get connected to any of those groups. So I think that's actually all we have. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Carla and Sarah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Marie and Gary. That was, again, a lot of information, but honestly, if you want to, if you're considering purchasing an electric vehicle, like that was a wonderful tutorial, just kind of bringing people up to speed. While we transition, I want to drop in that third poll question. If you can take a moment and respond and offer your feedback there. Again, Marie and Gary, just a great tag team effort. And then what we'll do is kind of transition into there's some great chat going on in the chat box here. And I'm gonna get things started with just a question really to the two of you guys. And this is just more of a general question. Just can you share just a little bit about your background and your pathway to either working with EVs or being in this sector? Gary, it almost seems as if you were like an EV car salesman. Was that in your background?
I have never been a car salesman. In fact, my family members kind of looked at me strange when I first started getting interested in EVs, because I really had not been interested in cars before. my family history is to view cars as utilitarian transportation. And so what the car you bragged about was the car that you spent the least on that got you to your destination reliably. So having me talk about how great the acceleration is and things like that is all a big departure. I owned a Toyota Prius, 2004, so I've been interested in sustainable transportation, but if you've driven a Prius before, you know that it's not a barn burner for going 0 to 60. So I heard that you get sort of the environmental benefits with EVs, but also it's a fun car to drive. So I started paying more attention to that, and indeed, they are very fun cars to drive. That's one reason that drive-in rides are really so good for getting people interested in EVs, because once you try it out and you feel it's like, wow, that's fun. You know, I can get to point A and point B and I can have a good time doing it.
Great, great. Marie, how long have you been with Drive Electric Ohio?
I have actually only been with Drive Electric Ohio since the beginning of this year. Prior to that, I was with the Electrification Coalition. So Sarah and I are kind of doing a little swap there. So I was working with the electrification program, specifically in Central Ohio with the Smart Columbus Initiative. My background is in sustainability and public affairs. So thinking about what are the actions that we can do at a local level as organizations, as governments, as communities, to mitigate the impact of climate change. And you know, electric vehicles are one of the most necessary steps as we head that direction. So,
yeah. I'm going to go straight into the chat session because there was a lot of conversation about the most proven reliable BEV. Timothy Keys, are you still on? I can't tell if you are. There you are. You had asked that question, but there seemed to be some back and forth about it being Tesla. Gary or Marie, do you have a comment or maybe a thought or perspective on what would be the most proven reliable BEV?
So I think that for reliability, I'll kind of make a general statement, and then I'll see if I can talk about maybe more specific models. So the general statement is simply to point out that the drivetrain on EVs is incredibly simple, so there's very little for them to go wrong. They have a gas engine drivetrain will have 100 times more moving parts at least. So with an EV, there's no exhaust system, so you can't have a hole in your muffler. There's no water pump. There's no fuel pump. There's no oil changes. The list goes on and on and on. So the number of things that can go wrong with an EV is shorter. You can't even have the transmission go bad the way you would with a multi-speed transmission on a gas car, because it doesn't even have a transmission. So if you're thinking about kind of expensive repairs, you won't have a transmission repair likely for your EV. People do worry about how long the battery lives, how long the battery is good for. All battery EVs come with a 100,000 mile at least warranty from the manufacturer for the battery. So unless you're going to keep your car longer than that, you don't even need to worry about battery replacement. And some manufacturers are even more, like Toyota has 150,000 mile battery warranty now for their RAV4 Prime. Some of the Tesla models are 120,000 miles, so don't worry about the battery. Now, in terms of specific model reliability, you can look at something like Consumer Reports, which surveys its members. There are things that go wrong with cars that are not the drivetrain. So if you look at Teslas, for example, they control everything by that big screen and have a lot of electronics. And so if the electronics go bad, then you could have a repair for that once it's out of warranty, after year 4. So I think you can kind of look at it from a reliability point of view. In general, EVs are going to be cheaper from a maintenance point of view, but then for specific models, just look at like Consumer Reports and others and see, what things have gone on.
Yeah, and I would add, generally speaking, and we're getting to the point where we're having vehicles, reach kind of that 10-year lifespan, some of those first generation EVs, and really seeing the batteries are holding up significantly better than was expected, right? Even from 10 years ago, and battery technology improved so much. So if you're worried about needing to replace a battery, I can say anecdotally, and Gary, chime in if you've heard otherwise, but I know lots of folks who drive used Nissan Leaf, use Bolts or i3s, and I've not heard of anybody replacing a battery. So, you know, range considerations might be a factor, especially if you're looking at use, but overall, I think that similar to range anxiety, if you start driving, battery quality holds up, or it turns out to be less of a factor than people expect it to be.
Great.
And I guess the only build I'd have on that, Marie, is just that if you are buying a used EV, you can look and see what the vehicle reports for its range, and it will probably be less than the full original range when it was new. So if you have a 10-year-old vehicle, you might have 90% of the original battery capacity. That's still very usable, but it'll be a bit less than you know, when the vehicle was new.
Great. I'm going to go to Doug Bell. Doug, it's really nice to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. You've a question in here about car dealerships. Do you want to talk about that for a second? What's your question?
Yeah, I think one of the hurdles to EV adoption is it seems most dealerships just don't support it. You know, the salesmen aren't familiar with how electric cars work. Many of them don't like electric cars. You know, they're old guys that like those big gas cars. And often they're not aware of the incentives. So I'm wondering if Gary or anyone else has noticed any progress in that arena. Are car dealerships becoming more supportive of EVs?
Marie, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. You're absolutely right. I think the most recent kind of national survey found that 75% of car dealers in the country are not selling EVs yet, whether that's because they're actively choosing not to, or they just aren't able to receive inventory. But correct, you know, up to this point, right, car dealerships make the majority of their money on maintenance, right? So you're not going to push EVs if there's not going to be folks bringing them back to be repaired and serviced. However, I will say that the market is shifting really rapidly, right? So, I mean, over 2/3 of people are interested in purchasing an EV in the future across all income brackets. So I mean, the interest is starting to be there. And so I think that we will see dealers really start to wake up to that idea here, especially amidst COVID and everything's happening now, right? Across the board, car sales are decreasing. So we're facing really a kind of a new market coming out of this. So we have seen individual dealers really step up and say, hey, I realize there's a lack of EV sales or leadership in this area, and I want to be the one dealership, kind of a destination dealership that people can come to. So I mean, that's a little bit of the overall trend and what we're kind of trying to do in the meantime. I know Gary and I have started, and Sarah and Carla as well, trying to identify dealers who might be some of those kind of EV flagship EV dealers that we can work with directly. Hopefully that kind of generally answers the question in a roundabout way.
Yeah.
But
I'll also throw out there that public and nonprofit partnerships are making a big dent in that. They recognize that dealerships are slow to change. And a really good example is the Smart Columbus project that happened up in the Columbus area. There was a dealership engagement aspect to it that really helped provide training and resources to dealers. And I've had friends in that area that go to buy cars, and if they're looking at EVs, it's a lot easier for them now. That work is still kind of being done in the Cincinnati area and other Midwestern areas, but Smart Columbus is a really good example of if there are people who have the time and resources to kind of provide that education to dealerships, it's possible to create a mind shift.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is something that we're, and that is some, no, you're fine. That is something that we're hoping to expand to take beyond just Central Ohio here in the near future.
Doug, there's one more reason for optimism I'll just point out, and that is as our auto manufacturers come out with EV models that are not kind of special sidelines like the Chevy Bolt, because frankly, you know, if the Chevy Bolt was a complete failure, you know, who'd notice, right? But with Ford, for example, coming out with an electric F-150 and the Ford Mustang, they're kind of core brands. If you're a Ford dealer, you're going to want to carry those. So I see that as being a reason for optimism as automakers, you know, really convert their core brand to electric, then the dealers are going to carry them.
I want to get Nicole Friend in here. She has a really interesting question about the overall footprint of vehicles cradle to grave. Nicole, are you able to unmute and kind of elaborate on the question there?
Sure. I had read a couple of years ago that even if you had a really old vehicle that was sort of a gas guzzler, that it still was better for the environment to maintain that vehicle well and drive it until it absolutely falls apart than to go out and buy a new vehicle. And I wonder if anything has changed since then.
Great. Marie, Gary, anything on that?
Yeah. I don't believe that has changed, right? Using what you have to its absolute extent is always going to be the least impactful, right? But at the point when you do purchase a new vehicle, right, the cradle to grave footprint of a new EV versus a new internal combustion vehicle is less, even if you're in a region that is vastly majority fossil fueled power electricity. So I think that your statement is still correct, right? Using what we have versus getting new things is always the least impactful option. But does not negate it does negate the argument that a coal-powered EV is no cleaner than a gasoline-powered vehicle.
Okay, great. I also have a question coming in from Denise Mustang, about transitioning. Am I looking at this right? Transitioning your car. Let me get you off mute. I'm sorry. You're on mute. There you go. No,
You're still on mute.
You're still on mute.
Got it. Okay, how's that?
There
That
you
works.
are.
Okay, two things real quick. I want to respond to what they were talking about just recently, is that if you have an old gas guzzling car and you buy an electric vehicle and you charge that electric vehicle with solar wind, which we all have the choice of doing right now, it's like your impact on the environment is going to be so great that it will by far take over that creating a new vehicle. I mean, every gallon of gas puts 23 pounds of CO2 in the atmosphere. A tree can only absorb 50 pounds a year. A person puts out about 4,400 pounds a year. So just think about that. Every gallon of gas you use is just a huge impact on the environment. So that's one thing. Go on.
Yeah, and I'll add Denise, that car manufacturers are committing to phasing out some of the heavy metal components of batteries that are the really kind of heavy impact of sort of the birth part of cradle to grave, right? So the really impactful parts of making these new vehicles, they have committed to phasing out in the future. So I think especially if those practices do get a little bit better and you're able to do on renewables, right, that switch from a gas guzzler to an EV here in the next couple of years would definitely be.
Yeah, so how much CO2 do they put in the atmosphere to manufacture a new car? And then compare that to 23 pounds every gallon. Okay. Then getting to my question is, I have on the internet research, and I've heard from my car buddies, you can buy a kit for 10 to 15,000 and convert your car into an electric plug-in. But the research I did, there's nobody in Cincinnati who does that. There's a place in Arizona that does it, you know, and so I was just wondering if there's anybody around here that does that. Like if you have a gas car you really love, you could make it. It wouldn't be financially smart because you know, it's a lot of money, but does anybody do that?
I don't know anyone in Cincinnati that does, or in the area. I do know that the firm that I think you're talking about that will sell you a kit. So they make you know, batteries and drivetrains, and the key is to get somebody to rip the internal combustion engine and convert your car. I think it's just a pretty small market for doing that, because
Well, yeah,
it's cheaper and easier just to get an EV, even a used one. But I did see some of the converted cars, and all the ones I saw were classic cars, where they said, look, I have like a 1965 classic car and I want to switch it over to electric. It used a leaded gas, for example. So they had special reasons for doing it, rather than, you know, I have an old Buick and I want to make it electric.
Okay, thank you.
If anybody's really into pop culture, that is what, when Prince Harry and Meghan got married, they drove a converted EV from the chapel to their reception.
Love that. I have two quick questions here I want to get in, and these would be the last ones before we close out, since we're at the top of the hour. One is from Lori Knuckles: what is the industry projection in oil and gas acceptance? And then the other comes in from Jillian Sela: is there any information available about the lifespan in years or mileage for EVs? Is there some resource you can send them to get that information?
Gary, can you speak to lifespan?
I'll speak to lifespan if you can think about the industry projection in oil and gas acceptance. So for lifespan,
really quick.
there's two things I can point out. So the Tesla Model S's have been around long enough that there's quite a bit of data on how long the batteries last. And so for those, they're showing, you know, still 90%, you know, original battery capacity. And some of them have been driven over 400,000 miles. So the longevity of the drivetrain is very good. Let's see, longevity. Oh, and also just in terms of the auto manufacturers, they claim that their drivetrain and batteries are designed to last the life of the car. So Tesla says that's 300,000 miles for theirs, and then for the others, like Toyota's, you know, Toyota's warranting their new ones for 150,000 miles. So I think you can have confidence in the longevity of the EVs.
Great. Yeah. Can you take the other question, Nicole, Marie?
I don't think we can answer that one succinctly. I think we could have a whole multi-day Zoom series on projections, but why don't myself or maybe Liz can find a good article about EVs and the projections in the market that we could send out with the recording of this. Does that sound like a fair trade?
That would be wonderful. And then we can get that information to Lori. So I definitely appreciate that. And we'll send it out to the folks in the follow-up. That is now a wrap for our E-Vroom Zoom number 2. I told you guys there's going to be an awful lot of information and good stuff, right? I just want to really thank you, Gary and Marie, for sharing your wealth of knowledge. Seriously, EV Cincy is so fortunate to have your organizations as partners in this work. Thanks again to all of you all for joining in on the conversation. Please go ahead and respond to the poll question there. Our next Vroom Zoom event is July 15th from 3 to 4. And we'll be joined by the regional team from Greenlots. They are going to be talking about charging technologies. We'll have Ryan Walling, who's the sales engineer at Greenlots, along with Michael Smucker, who's the regional sales manager. We'll send around the registration link in a follow-up email, which will also include a link to our brand new newsletter. So excited about this. The first edition will drop. The plan is to drop June 26th. So when you see that, sign up for it. Please also visit EV Cincy website for more information about EVs in Cincinnati. You can find us on the City of Cincinnati website at www.cincinnati-oh.gov. /OES. Thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful Thursday and hope to see you all in July. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.